If y'all indulge me just a minute before we actually get into our study of Philippians chapter 4, I really want to take a minute and say thank you to the congregation, to the elders for honoring this invitation that was given to me several years ago to come here. It was wound up being a pleasant surprise because when I actually was invited to come here, it was before Wayne and Cindy were here, and that was a nice thing that happened in the years in between the invitation and the arrival. But thank you for the invitation to be here and give me this opportunity, this platform to study the Bible with you for a few days. Your hospitality has been just above board. I have been treated so kindly, so generously since I've been here, in the accommodations, in the food, and just frankly, I always appreciate a good meal. They can probably tell that by looking at me. But I appreciate good conversation more than food, because you can always get food. You can get food anywhere. You can't always get a good conversation. And I've had so many wonderful conversations with so many different people. And it's amazed me how many connections that we have had in talking with folks, finding out connections to locations where we have lived or where we're from, churches that we have a connection to, people that we have connections to. I had lunch with somebody today and found out that I knew them and didn't know I knew them. We were in Costa Rica together when I worked for Latin American Missions, and didn't even realize that until today at lunch. So it's been a great week, and y'all have showered me with food. Man, somebody gave me tonight, they came in and handed me a box of Little Debbie's, and we agreed that you can't find joy in Little Debbie's, but you can sure find happiness in them. So thank y'all. Just, I don't know what to say. I only regret I have is that my wife wasn't able to be here, and to also get to be the recipient of how sweet and kind and good y'all are. You're giving the Lord's people a great reputation in this community, I know. If this is how you treat people, then you're really putting a great foot forward for Jesus, and I know that will reap dividends in time, because people know these are good people here. They love people. They take care of people. They want to make people family, even if they're strangers. So thank you 100 times over for that. And I'm so thankful. Wayne and Cindy, I have been the benefactor of their hospitality for almost 25 years now, very close to it. The very first time they hosted me was in Homerville, Georgia. I held a meeting at that congregation where Cindy's family is, and I stayed with them. Our boys were little children at that time. And I have stayed with them in multiple places. I never came when it was in Nesbitt. Did come when they were in Gulf Breeze. Almost came when he was in High Springs. But they were supposed to come, and there was a problem that happened, and that wound up having to be canceled. But almost everywhere they've ever been, we've had an opportunity to be there. And they're always so good. Thank you. Thank you so much. They're sweet people, and I know you're a sweet congregation. And even though I'm an outsider, I love it when good preaching families and good congregations, their hearts get intertwined, because good things happen. So God bless you all, and thank you so much for everything this week. Hope to leave you with something tonight. I hope tonight is the best of all, because in my opinion, it's one of the most needed of all the things that we're going to talk about. The statistics say that somewhere between 50 and 70% of people in America, and the numbers, by the way, for teenagers are no better. In fact, in some demographics, it's a little bit higher, suffer from anxiety. Anxiety, you could give a medical definition. The best definition that I've ever heard for anxiety is this. Anxiety is when we feel the pain for things that have not yet happened. That's what anxiety is like. Experience the pain of an event that has not yet occurred. Now, when we get in Philippians chapter 4, it depends on what version you're using. In verse number 6, you're going to see, if it's a King James version, be careful for nothing. And the reason they use the word careful in that old English is just look at how break the word up into its two pieces. Care and full. In other words, full of care. Filled up with care, concern. So the rest of the time, and if you're using a modern translation, it almost always says be anxious for nothing. And that's really a good depiction of what he's talking about, is what we would call anxiety. Now, I will say this, there is a way in which we use the word anxious that's not a negative. Anxiety, there is a way that it can be positive, like, for example, I'm anxious to get home and see my wife tomorrow. It's not, I'm not experiencing pain for something that hasn't yet occurred. In that case, I'm experiencing excitement for something that has not yet occurred. But that's usually not what we're talking about when we're talking about being anxious. We're usually talking about worry. And so I'm going to use those words tonight, probably interchangeable. Concern, worry, anxiety, stress. And that's what we're talking about. So whichever word I use, just know that that's what we're going to be discussing. Generally speaking, there are two types of people in the world. There are the people who don't ever worry about anything. Nothing phases them, nothing gets to them, I know who you are, by the way, because your spouse has just looked at you. Okay? So I know who the never worry about anything people are. Hold on, I'll give you a chance to look the other way in just a second, and I'll know who the worriers are. It's just stuff doesn't bother them. It just, they just see everything. It's like water off a duck's back. They just rolls right off of them. Nothing phases them. Nothing seems to get to them. And a lot of times, people get frustrated with them because they don't worry about stuff. How can you not be worried about this? And they're just like, I don't know. And I'll tell you this, they don't have some magic secret. They haven't figured it out. They don't have the formula and they're hoarding it and keeping it to themselves. I know how to avoid worry and I'm just not going to tell anybody about it. No, God just made them that way. They don't know, they don't understand people who worry about everything. They don't understand how or why. It's just their makeup. A lot of times though, if you have the people who don't worry about anything, a lot of times the reason they don't worry about anything is this. Because their mindset is, if there's something that concerns me and I can do something about it, then I do it. I don't sit and worry about it. I do whatever it is. Maybe you come home and you walk in the door, the trash needs to be taken out, the laundry needs to be washed, dishes need to be washed, grass needs to be cut, kids need help with homework. And some of you, are on the way home and you know this, and that anxiety's starting to build up. Now others on the way home, they're driving home and when they walk in, they go, you know what? I'll take out the trash, I'll wash the dishes, I'll cut the grass, I'll do the laundry, I'll help the kids. In other words, why be anxious about it? I can do something about it. And then the cause of the anxiety doesn't exist anymore. And in just a minute, we're going to see that Paul touches on that even in this text, in verse number 2 and 3. He's going to talk about, if you want to alleviate anxiety, sometimes there's something that can be done about it. Their other thought is this: if something's making me anxious and there's something I can do about it, I do something about it. But if there's nothing I can do about it, then why worry about it? Because I can't do nothing about it anyway. So why worry about something I can't do anything about anyway? It's going to happen or it's not going to happen and I can't do anything about it. So why worry about it? That's how the non-worriers think. I can either do something about it or I can't. If I can do something about it, do it. Problem's gone. No anxiety. If I can't, why worry about it? Can't change it anyway. And then there are the people who worry about everything. God's little sense of humor is that He has a tendency to put the people who never worry about anything and the people who worry about everything in the same house. And say, now figure this out. Just like the people who don't worry about anything don't really have an answer for why they don't worry. That's just who I am. The people who worry about everything, they don't know why they worry about everything either. It's not like they choose to. It's not like they want to. It's not like they like it or enjoy it. In fact, everybody I know that struggles with anxiety, they hate it. It exhausts them. It drives them crazy. They don't like that about themselves. But they don't know how to not be like that. Now what does the don't worry about anything person say to the person who worries about everything? Just don't worry about it. Like they hadn't thought of that yet. Oh, yeah, I never thought of that. I can just not worry about it. They don't, of course they can't do that. they've tried that. They don't know how to not do that. Now, I'm going to say this right now because I'm scared I'll get caught up talking about things and forget to make this point. And if I only make one point tonight, I want it to be this point. Because I know that there are people who worry all the time about everything. Anxiety is a big deal for you. I know that because some of you have actually come and talked to me. So I know I'm talking to some of you, certainly, and likely quite a few of you. And I want to make sure that you leave here tonight knowing something emphatically. Because here's the script that runs in the head of the worrier. They're reading their Bible one day because they believe that the Scriptures have the answers to their problems and God will tell them what to do. And so they're reading their Bibles and then they read this verse that says, "Be anxious for nothing." And they're going, I can't remember the last day that I didn't wrestle with anxiety about everything. And I'm married to somebody who doesn't worry about anything, so I have to do double time and worry about all their stuff too because they don't worry about it. So I have to do my worrying and I have to worry about their stuff too because they don't worry about it. And then they read this verse that says, "Be anxious for nothing." And now they've got this whole new world of anxiety. Because in addition to struggling with anxiety about everything all the time, now they have this new concern of, and God says, don't do that, and I always do that, and I don't know how to not do that. So now, on top of that, I have to worry about the fact that I'm not a good Christian, and I'm living in sin, and I'm separated from God, and He doesn't love me, and I'm going to be lost. If that is what you think Philippians 4:6 means, if you trust me about anything, there's a lot of stuff about the Bible I do not know. I am not an expert, but I've spent my whole life, at least adult life, studying it because it's the most important thing in my world. If you will trust me in just one thing and one thing alone this week, trust me when I say this, that is not what Philippians 4:6 is trying to say to you. God is not mad at you because you struggle with anxiety. God is not disappointed at you because you struggle with anxiety. God is not going to punish you because you struggle with anxiety. You're not sinning against God because you struggle with anxiety. You're not going to be lost because you wrestle with anxiety. So if there's one thing we can take off the worry list, please let it be that. Now, why do I think that? I want you to look at verse number 5. Right after he says in verse 4, "Rejoice in the Lord always," and again I say rejoice. He says, "Let your patience," King James says moderation, "let your patience be made known unto all men." Now, what is at the end of the word all men? Well, punctuation mark, right? Period. Stop. End of sentence. Then a new sentence begins. Now keep in mind that the chapter and verse divisions that we have, I'm just going to be honest with you, they are arbitrary. I know you'd like to think there's some, God-ordained reason for the way our Bible is divided up into chapters and verses, that there's some scientific formula that was used, and I'm telling you, if you study the history of it, it was basically a Catholic cardinal who was riding on horseback across France, and to pass the time, because he owned a publishing company and wanted to print new Bibles, he decided to divide the Bible up into verses. And that is the science behind it. It's arbitrary. Now, I'm thankful for chapter and verse divisions because, for one thing, it makes it easier to locate places. Another thing, for some reason, it kind of makes it easier to memorize. But sometimes those chapter and verse divisions come, I think, in very unfortunate places because they chop up ideas. Have you ever read a novel that had verses? Can you imagine how differently you'd read a novel if it had verses? Because, see, our brains are conditioned. When we see chapter 2, then chapter 3, what is our brain conditioned to do? Just like when you read a novel and you go from chapter 2 to chapter 3, what does your brain do? Okay, that is over, and now something new is beginning. And then you insert those verses, and in our brain, every time you go from verse 4 to verse 5 to verse 6, in our brain it's like new thought, new thought, new thought, new thought. Remember when I told you the other day that the context for what we were talking about was chapter 1 and verse 12 to chapter 2 and verse 18. That's one thought. Well, I want to suggest something to you about be anxious for nothing. I want to suggest to you that the context for it is actually the end of verse number 5. He says, the Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing. Verse 6 is not a commandment. All right? It's not, God commands you, don't ever be anxious. God commands it. Was Jesus anxious the night before His crucifixion? Let me ask you this. Have you ever worried so bad you've sweated drops of blood? Okay, then you don't know real anxiety like Jesus did then. I'm not saying you don't know anxiety. I'm just saying, you want to talk about worry? You want to talk about dread? If you haven't been there yet, you haven't been to the level of anxiety that Jesus has been in. So do not tell me that anxiety is a sin. I've heard too many preachers make that ridiculous statement. And the harm that has been done by people who struggle with anxiety because of statements like that, some people never get over it. So what does this mean then? Be anxious for nothing. If it's not a commandment, then what is it? Take it in the context of His statement of, the Lord is at hand. You don't have to be anxious about anything. Why? Because the Lord is at hand. He's here. He's present. He's not far away. It's not that He doesn't know what's going on in your world. It's not that He doesn't see what's happening in your life. It's not that He can't do or won't do or doesn't care anything about it. The Lord is at hand, so you don't have to be anxious. Now, I want to put this in a different context. If you are a parent, chances are you have experienced this at some point. You're laying in bed, middle of the night, you wake up and there's a little one, maybe 4, 5, 6, standing right there at the bed, tears in their eyes, scared out of their mind because of the lightning or the thunder or the boogeyman, or the monster in the closet or the dark, of all the things that scare little kids at night. And that little child is standing there and they're scared. And what does every good parent do in that moment? It's okay, don't be scared. Has that ever worked, by the way? Have you ever had the 4-year-old go, thank you, Mommy, I am better now? It's the same as the non-worrier telling the worrier, well, don't worry about it. So let me ask you this question. You say, it's okay, don't be scared. And they stay scared. I want to sleep in your bed tonight. Can I turn on can we turn on the light? Will you sleep in my room? I'm scared. You tell them, don't be scared, and they're still scared. Now, has anybody, after that, the child's still scared, has any of you say, well, I tell you what, if you're going to disobey me like that, we're just going to have to ground you. Well, I tell you what, let's see what a little pop on the rear will do. No, for crying out loud, no. You have compassion. You have sympathy. Your heart reaches out. And how do you try to comfort them? Why do you try to comfort them? Don't be scared. Mama's here. Don't be scared. Daddy's here. You're okay. Now, just saying don't be scared doesn't make the fear away, but reminding them, I'm here. That helps to make it a little better, doesn't it? Because I know that this person that loves me and whose job it is to take care of me is right here beside me. That's what verses 5 and 6 mean. When God says, be anxious for nothing, it's the same as a parent saying to the child, don't be afraid, don't be anxious, your Father's here. I'm right here. I'm not far away. You're not on your own. I understand there's a lot of big, bad, scary stuff in this world, and it terrifies little old you, but I'm telling you, I'm at hand. I'm right here. I'm near. You don't have to be anxious. And if you say, but Lord, I'm still anxious. I'm still scared. I promise you He's not going, well, I'm going to have to discipline you apparently. I'm going to have to teach you a lesson, and we'll see how about you do with that anxiety next time. No, for crying out loud, no. God is a loving Father. I love the way Peter describes it. He says that He remembers that we are dust. Excuse me, not Peter, David. The psalmist says that God pities His children because He knows our frame. He remembers that we're dust. Storms aren't a big deal to Him because He can walk on the waves. He can speak to the winds and they stop. Demons don't scare him. He can just say a word and cast them out. Disease isn't a problem. He can just tell it to be gone, tell it to be healed, tell it to be fixed, and it does it. Death doesn't even bother him. Jesus said, I lay my life down. If I lay it down, I'll pick it back up. He says to others, arise, walk. He's not afraid of those things but he remembers that you're not like that. You're not divine. You're dust. You're frail. And so, storms scare us. Disease scares us. Death scares us. All the stuff of life, it scares us. But please don't leave here thinking that if you struggle with anxiety, that God is somehow disappointed or angry at you because of it. God looks at you with a pitiful, compassionate heart, and He remembers your frame. And He says, it's okay. I'm here. That's what He's saying there. Now, let's talk to the people who have more of a mindset. And this is maybe something that we can learn. If you're an anxiety person, maybe this is something that you can learn from the non-anxiety people. And that is, if there's a problem, do something about it. Don't worry about it. Do something about it. And that's where verse number 2 comes into play. Paul says, I beseech Euodias and Syntyche. We don't know a lot about them. We just know they're two members there at that congregation. I beseech Euodias and Syntyche that they be of the same mind in the Lord. And I entreat you also, true yokefellow, peacemakers, help those women which labored with me in the gospel, and Clement also, and with others of my fellow laborers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. Let your patience be known unto all men. Sometimes we have anxiety because we have unresolved issues. Sometimes anxiety exists because there are things that we have left undone that we should have done. And oftentimes that's yes, could it be about unwashed dishes or unmade beds? Yeah, of course it could be. But also it can be about unrepaired relationships. Picture this, it's Sunday morning in Philippi. Euodias is making her way to the church building. And as she's walking there, she just happens to get to the front door right at the same time as Syntyche. Now, I don't know what the conflict is or who's at fault or whatever, but Euodias is not here to defend herself, so we're gonna pick on her, all right? And she gets right there, and Syntyche gets there, and they're reaching for the door at the same time, and she goes, oh, great. And suddenly she remembers that she forgot her purse in the car. She's going to go back. Syntyche, on the other hand, all morning has been dreading getting up and coming to worship because she knows Euodias is going to be there. And that thing happened last week, and they haven't spoken since. In other words, the relationship has been damaged or fractured. By the way, how would you like to have your conflicts in the church aired for everybody to read 2,000 years later? I always think about that when I read it. It's like, thanks a lot, Paul. Put this in here about us, I don't know what it was about, but I do know this. It likely was a source of anxiety between those two people because now every time they're around one another, it's going to be awkward. Why? Because there's some unresolved conflict between them. And it's not just going to affect them, by the way. It's going to affect everybody. And I'm not pointing at nobody, I'm just pointing this direction. I'll point up here. You can't be at odds with one another and it not affect all of you. Because all of you are connected to you and you. And so if the two of you are at odds with one another, it's not just going to cause anxiety between the two of you, it's going to cause the anxiety amongst all of you. Don't you remember how it was in high school that there were certain people that you couldn't be friends with because you were friends with this person and this person wasn't friends with those people? You remember that? That's where the cliques form and come from. We don't want them in our group. Yeah, but we grew up together. We were friends. We used to play together all the time. Yeah, well, if you want to be with this group, then you can't hang out with that person because they're not part of our group. That's how conflict affects entire congregations. And so what Paul says is, I want all of you to intervene, to intercede, and plead with them to make reconciliation. Okay? Here's our worriers, people who don't worry situation. The anxiety that exists when there's conflict between me and somebody else is something that can be cleared up by going to that person and working it out. Then the anxiety about that situation's gone. Now, yeah, initially that's hard to do. That's an awful feeling. You get that sickness in the pit of your stomach, and there's this dread, and sometimes it's the opposite, though. Sometimes it's our pride. We think, well, they're the problem. It's their fault. They should come and they'd come and apologize, and everything would be all right. Listen, when the question is asked, who does God expect to reconcile with the other person? The answer is both of us. On different occasions, we're told this in Scripture. If you're going up to the temple to worship, to make your offering at the altar, and you remember that your brother has aught against you, okay? They've got something against you. In other words, your brother feels like you have wronged them. He says, leave your gift, go be reconciled with your brother, then come make your offering. And so, if I believe that you have a problem with me, God says it's my responsibility to go to you and seek to be reconciled. But it also says, if your brother offends you, now I'm the one who's offended. I'm the one who's been wronged. What does the Bible say? Go and tell him his fault between the two of you alone. If he won't hear you, we've got to read this carefully. It doesn't say go and tell 2 or 3 more people, because that's usually what we do at that point. He says, go get 2 or 3 more people. Bring them as witnesses. And don't poison the well. Don't tell them why they're coming. Just say, hey, I need you to be a part of something. Can you meet with me and so on this? Don't go tell them. Say, listen, let me tell you what so-and-so did. That's called poisoning the well. In other words, you're getting them on your side before they ever enter the room. You may find out with neutral, third-party observers, maybe you're the one who's actually the problem. So he says, go get them and bring them in as witnesses, and then try to be reconciled to your brother. Tell him his fault with witnesses. And if he won't listen even in that context, then he says, now you bring the whole church in. Because see, the problem between you doesn't just create a problem between you. It creates a problem between the whole you and the whole church. And so if you two can't work it out alone, then you have to call on everybody who's going to be affected by it. And at the end of each one of those statements, he makes this same saying. And if he hears you, then you've gained your brother. And so the situation comes down to this. If there is conflict between you and somebody else, and you believe that you are at fault, if there's conflict between you and somebody else, and you believe they are at fault, you both have a responsibility to go to each other. Nobody can say it's somebody else's job. Because either you are the offender and you should go to them, or you are the offended and you should go to them. And reconcile. In other words, if you can do something about it, do something about it. And the source of the anxiety can go away. But what if it's not something like that? And by the way, just so you know, in our family, I'm the don't ever worry about nothing person. I'm not super mentally strong. I'm just built that way. It's not anything I did or do. It's the way my brain works. So I can't tell you, okay, here's what you need to do if you want to never worry about things. I don't know. And so I struggle to understand the people who always worry about things. But I was raised in a home with a worry about everything person. My mama worries about everything. Always have. I remember one time we're all getting about ready. Mama's going to make spaghetti, and we're all about ready to eat. And she opens a pack of hamburger meat, and as soon as she said, "Does this smell funny to you?" I knew we was eating Taco Bell for supper. I knew it. "Does this smell funny to you?" "No, Mama, it smells fine." "Daddy, Jade, No, Mama, it smells fine. It smells like hamburger meat. It looks a little weird to me. Mama, it looks like there's nothing wrong. Is it out of date? Well, no, it's not supposed to go out of date for like 4 more days. Has it been in the refrigerator? Yeah, it's been in the refrigerator. Guess what she did? Trashed it. I used to get frustrated with that. I don't anymore because I know she can't help it. That's who she is. That's who she is. And here's something that I learned about living with somebody or being around people who worry about everything. You can get mad at them for being who they are and how they were created. Or you can ask yourself this question: do I want to help them? And you know what, Mama? If throwing away the hamburger meat and going to Taco Bell tonight instead helps you feel better, I'm more worried about how you feel than eating spaghetti. It's called compassion. I don't understand it. It's crazy to me. But it don't matter if I understand it. I love my mama. And she didn't want to do anything that she feared might bring harm to her family. I've told my mom 1,000 times, I said, Mama, you do realize that 90% of the stuff you worry about never happens? You know what her response was? See, it works. That's not the point I was making, Mama. That's not the point I was trying to make. Don't try to fix worriers. Stop trying to fix them. Learn how to love them. Because I promise you this, you may not be a worrier, but there's something else about you that drives everybody else in your life crazy about you. Mine is, well, if you hadn't guessed, my nickname growing up was Motor Mouth. One uncle called me Motor Mouth, one called me Jabberjaws, because I never stopped talking. And you know what? Sometimes I drive the people in my family crazy because I never hush my mouth. I just talk too much. So the point is this: if you are a never worrier and you are attached to an always worrier, stop trying to fix them. They don't need fixing. They need loving. They need compassion. They need help. Do what you can to help alleviate the anxieties. And don't judge them or make them feel that there's something wrong with them because they struggle with them. Now, I don't want to leave you without any tools. This is where the handle comes in right here, okay? This is the handle part. We've already had one of them, by the way. If there's something you can do about it, then do it. That's one of the things to alleviate anxiety. If there's something you can do about it, then do it. All right? But what about the stuff that I can't do anything about? Even then, there's still something you can do. Notice how he goes on after that. Be anxious for nothing, but is a word of contrast. It means, so instead of this, then do this. Don't do this, do this. Rather than being anxious about everything, be anxious for nothing, but, and I love the English, this is one of the examples where the translation actually is better in the English than it is in the original language. Because there's this beautiful play on words. Be anxious for nothing, but in contrast, in everything. See that? Nothing and everything. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication. God's not saying don't do anything. God's saying, let me tell you what you can do. In everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known unto God. Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. If you're going to be up half the night worrying anyway, turning your hair gray, putting wrinkles on your face, ulcers in your stomach, if you're going to be up doing that anyway, why not take that same energy, that anxious energy, and channel it into something productive? Supplication, prayer, thanksgiving. You like that song, when upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one. If you're going to stay up all night, anxiety's going to do that to you, pull out a pen and a piece of paper and start writing down all the things you have to be thankful for. In everything with prayer and supplication. Supplication is a request. Prayer, you can get fancy definitions for prayer. Here's all prayer. Prayer just means talking to God. That's all it means. Now there's fancy theological definitions. It just means a conversation with God. So it says, okay, you're going to be up all night worrying about it? Talk to me. Maybe your family's tired of hearing about it for the 10th time. Okay. God will never grow tired of hearing about it. Tell Him about it. Talk to Him about it. Now, some of you, I'm going to lose you here because some of my people think I'm crazy here too. Sometimes my prayers literally have to I go for a walk and I talk out loud to God just like I'm talking to you right now. I can't do the silent, I can't do the this thing. It's got to come out of my mouth. I got to say it. And so if you need to do that, go for a walk, go in another room, drive down the road, and literally, audibly, out loud, talk to God and tell Him all of the things that you would say to anybody else that would listen. Talk about all those anxieties, all of those fears, dread, worry. Talk about it. Tell Him. With prayer and supplication. Now, supplication means I'm asking for something. This is where you say, God, help me. This is the little boy standing by Mama's bed saying, Mama, I'm scared. Can I sleep with you? That's supplication. God, you're going to have to help me because I can't do this. I need peace. I can't take it anymore. With thanksgiving, there's your list of all the things you have to be thankful for. You know what that is? That's called diluting your anxiety. In Jesus' day, they didn't have a way to perfectly preserve grape juice so that it wouldn't ferment. And so what they would do is they would water it down. They would dilute it with water. And that way people wouldn't get intoxicated off of it when it was fermented. They'd water it down, dilute it. When you spend your time in prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving, what you're doing is you're diluting your anxieties. Yes, you've got this list in your head of stuff you're worried about, but when you start making that list of all that you have to be grateful for and thankful for, that list will probably far outweigh the anxiety list, and you can at least water it down a little bit where it's not so powerful and prevalent. And the thing that is in the front of your mind is gratitude. Now, this is my favorite part of the text, though. With prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. Now, this is like an exchange that takes place. You do that. God, it's not that if you got anxiety, you can't do anything. God says, here's something that you can do. I'll give you something you do. I've heard people describe anxiety like this. It's like a rocking chair, emotional rocking chair. There's a lot of activity, but you don't ever go anywhere. There's movement, but you don't move. You're still where you are. And listen, if you are, and some of you may be thinking, this is my title, you may be the world class, you may be the Michael Jordan of worrying. You are the greatest worrier who has ever worried on the face of the earth. And you can have your best day, you worry like nobody's ever worried before. And at the end of that amazing performance, nothing will have changed. That's why I said it's like a rocking chair. You hadn't gone anywhere. And so God says, so instead of that, do this. That's where the prayer part comes in. Do that. And He says, and if you do this, then I'll exchange it. You give me your anxieties, and here's what I'll give you in return. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. There's two things I want you to see. Look at verse 7 and look at verse number 9. Those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. Do you see those bookends? Verse 7, the peace of God. Verse 9, the God of peace. They're bookends. Now, if you look at what takes place in between that, the peace of God, the God of peace. In other words, God's peace, He says, I'll give it to you. The God of peace will give you His peace in exchange for your anxieties. The God of peace, which passes all understanding, the peace of God which passes all understanding. Here's what I understand that thing to mean. It doesn't mean that you can't comprehend it. The peace that passes understanding doesn't mean that it's incomprehensible. It's mean you can't explain it, you have to experience it. Does that make sense? It's a peace that has to be experienced to be understood. Have you ever had somebody describe for you like this amazing meal? Where did we eat today? What was it called? Something meal? Foothill meal or something like that? We ate sandwiches there today. Listen, y'all, that meatloaf sandwich. It hit me so good I didn't even eat supper tonight. I'm still full. It was fantastic. Now, I could, as you well know, I could spend 10 minutes eloquently describing that sandwich to you. But you know what you could do instead? In 1 second, you could just take a bite of it, and you'd understand for yourself, right? I can talk about it, or you could just experience it. That's what the peace that passes understanding means. Yeah, I could preach a great sermon on peace and tell you the definition of it and all the different times it's used in the Bible and the way it's used in the Bible, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Or you could just experience it. And when you experience it, you don't even need words because it's greater than words. It's a peace that is better experienced than described. The peace that passes understanding will keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. That word keep is really neat because it's the same word that is used of a Roman soldier who stands guard, a sentry. Like when they put soldiers to guard Jesus' tomb, it's this word. And he says, so look, the peace of God, the God of peace, will stand guard over your heart. And when those anxieties come, guess what they're going to meet before they meet you? They're going to meet the God of peace. They're going to meet the peace of God. They'll stand guard over your heart and your mind. If you do what God has asked you to do. If you do what God has told you to do. With supplication, prayer, thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. Finally, brethren. That's the part y'all were looking for. The finally, brethren part. Y'all, there's so much we had to leave out. I hate it. You probably noticed we skipped chapter 3. We didn't. I wish there's so much more I wish we could have done to talk about how we can cultivate joy in all circumstances. We got to stop somewhere. I'll give you this though. If you want to, chapter 3. Here's how you can remember it. It's the gospel according to Kenny Rogers. Okay, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. That's what chapter 3 is about. Paul says if you want to have joy, there's some stuff you're just going to have to get away from. You're going to have to fold your cards, leave the table, you got to walk away from it. And he talks about his heritage as a Pharisee of the Pharisees and the zealous Jew. And he says, you know what? And I counted all of that stuff as garbage for the glory that I have in Jesus. In other words, I walked away from it. The joy that I have now, I couldn't have had it while holding on to this. And so yeah, if you want that joy that we're talking about all week, sometimes there's stuff you just got to walk away from. You got to let it go and move on. That's what we would have talked about if we had time. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, honest, just, pure, and lovely, whatever is of a good report, if there's any virtue, if there's any praise, and that's a rhetorical question, yes there is, think on these things. What can you do? With prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And focus on things that are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and of good report. Now the word thinketh there, if you're using the King James, it's an accounting term. It means to take inventory. Same one that's over in 1 Corinthians 13 when he says, love thinketh no evil, does not keep a record of evil. He's talking about counting inventory. That's where the word comes from. And so he says, take inventory of these things. One of my first jobs ever was working at a True Value hardware store that my uncle owned. And mostly what I did was sweep up and take out trash, stuff like that. But part of my job was a couple times a year we had to do inventory. Anybody ever had to do inventory in here? You ever done inventory in a hardware store? Oh, it's not bad counting how many brooms there are. That's not a big deal. Counting how many number 2, 3/4 inch pan head screws there are in a box of 1,000. You don't count the box. You count what's in the box. 1, 2, like 563, 567, 568. Somebody goes, hey, can you tell me where the brooms are? They're on aisle number 2. Okay, thank you. 1, 2. That's what he says to do with whatever is true, honest, pure, lovely, and of good report. Keep rolling it through your mind. Because isn't that what anxiety is? It's all of the negative, bad stuff that could have, might have, may have, will have happened, just running over and over and over in your mind. He's saying distract yourself with these good things. Run them through over and over and over in your mind. Take up the memory, the mental space. Have you ever tried to have a bunch of different applications running on a computer and it just doesn't have the memory to do it? That's what he's saying to do. Overload that negative stuff with this good stuff. Dilute it. Dilute your anxiety. Can I have 4 more minutes? Is that good? Y'all got anywhere to be? All right. I got fudge rounds in the car if anybody needs a snack. Give me just 4 more minutes. Verse 11. Here's the last piece of it. Something you can do. Not that I speak in respect of want. For I have learned. Underline that and don't forget it. I have learned. I have learned means this doesn't come natural to me. I have learned means I don't have to practice it. I just do it. I have learned means I said it backwards. I have learned means that it doesn't come natural. It means I had to learn how to do it. And usually at first, you don't do it well. Think about the first time you rode a bike, you drove a car, you threw a football, you cooked supper. Y'all, when Jade and I first got married, I wanted to surprise her one time. She was at work, and I was going to surprise her. I was going to cook supper for her. I was so proud. I was going to make fried chicken and mashed potatoes. And I had a recipe, had all this stuff, seasoning added up to the flour, and I rolled the chicken in it and everything. Oh boy, it was going to be good. And I put it in the skillet and I was cooking it, but something just wasn't right. It just didn't look right. Something just wasn't right about it. And so after a little while, I called my mom. I was like, Mama, I need some help. Something ain't working here. This is not. I'm frying chicken and it don't look right. She's like, well, okay. She's like, well, tell me what you did. So we walked through it. And then gets to this one point, she goes, well, how much oil did you put in your pan? I said, oil? You didn't put oil in the pan? No, I just turned the skillet on high and threw the chicken in there. It cooked. I mean, it was cooked. My wife came home and was like, what have you done? She didn't eat it. I just washed the flour off and ate the chicken. I didn't care. I was hungry. She was not going to eat it. I had to learn how to cook. I didn't know what I was doing. And so, at first you make a mess out of it. I have learned means the things that we've been talking about that you can do if you're someone who wrestles with anxiety and you want to replace it with joy, it means that this is going to be a practice that's going to take time. You're not going to be able, if you could do it naturally, you wouldn't be the worrier. You'd be the never worrier. So it's going to be clunky for a while. And you're going to mess up and it's not going to seem like it's working. And all I'm asking you to do is don't give up. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. You will get better at it. My mama told me literally, she's heard me talk about this I don't know how many times. And she literally told me the other day, she said, I've really gotten a lot better about all the stuff that I worry about. It ain't easy. It takes time. But Paul said, I have learned that whatever condition I'm in, to be content. So if you're a worrier and you don't want to be a worrier, do what it takes to work on it. But in the meantime, be content. Be content with what? Be content with the knowledge that the Lord is at hand. You're not going through it alone. He's not turning his back on you. He's not mad at you. He's not going to punish you because you're wrestling with it. Be content with the knowledge that God will help you. The God of peace will give you the peace of God. And maybe one day, there'll be joy instead of anxiety. But until then, learn how to suffer with joy. Maybe tonight you have some anxiety about your eternity. And I'm going to tell you this is different from everything else I've said. If you're worried about where you're going to be in eternity, you should be worried. That's serious. You should be worried. But listen, if you're worried about it, do something about it. Don't just worry about it. Do something about it. If you don't have the peace of God tonight that you will be with Him eternally, do something about it. Remember, Ephesians 2 says that Jesus is our peace, and He has made peace between us and God. Have you come to Jesus, put Him on in baptism, named Him as the Lord of your life so that He can make peace between you and God? If you haven't, you should be worried about it until you do something about it. Stop worrying and start doing something. Maybe you've done that, but there's other things that you have allowed to come between. Your anxiety has not come between you and God, but there may be sin that has. Maybe there's relationships that are fractured that you have not done the work to reconcile yet. And maybe that reconciliation is going to take God's help because it's a deep fracture. Take the first step tonight. Don't worry about it. Do something about it. My time to talk about this is up. You've been gracious to give me. I took 5 more. I said 4, but I took 5. You've been gracious. Thank you. But now's the time for action. If there's some way that we can help you to rejoice in every situation because you're so joined to Jesus that nothing could separate you, let us help you do that tonight while we stand and sing.